Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to our UK trend prediction webinar for 2022. So good to see so many of you here. Seeing
Yeah,
some familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. I'm Miriam. I'm
I am.
head of content and research here at Tastewise, and I'm joined by Brian. Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Brian, head of partnerships at Tastewise. I'm very excited to see how many people are joining us today. Very excited to
Absolutely.
see what Miriam has prepared for us today, and we are very excited to hear all of your guys' thoughts. If you have any questions, comments, don't feel free to shoot them at us. We want to keep this very interactive today and hear your comments. Maybe Miriam, we can start about hearing where everybody's coming in from. Where are you all joining? You can type it in the
Yeah,
chat.
great idea. Let's see where people are in from today. I'll start off. We've got from the Netherlands. I'm currently based in Virginia in the US. Brian, where are you?
I'm in New York, in Long Island. So a little bit of cold here, but
I'm
okay.
seeing lots of UK, which is great. Would love to know where in the UK you are from. If
I
there's a
also see
specific.
someone from Spain. Hola, Domenica. We also
Awesome.
speak Spanish here. For
Yeah,
those,
we're lucky today to have the US based team, which is a little bit different than the Israel based team. So for timing and
yeah.
and everything, it's nice to be able to be together. Leeds, Wales, great. Dan from Paris. Hi, Julie from Minnesota. Liverpool, London, amazing. So many great places today.
Colombia. Wow.
And Mexico also.
Yeah. I think
And
we're gonna have
Spain.
to
Wow,
host
we've got
one
a
in
nice
Spanish
connection.
eventually.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do this again in Spanish from Sheffield. Amazing. All right, well, welcome everyone. So glad that you've joined us. I'm seeing a lot more folks rolling in, so maybe we'll give it about a minute.
Yeah, maybe we can hear about we've been here about Leeds, Sheffield, Stafford. Very interesting. I don't know much about the culture and the cuisines in each of these places. Maybe some of you guys can tell us maybe your favorite foods locally.
Mm. Or even a favorite restaurant if you have.
Yeah.
Would love to hear. It's a great idea, Brian. Frodsham, England. Too hard to say and always so much to explore. I feel you. That's how I feel for most of the questions we ask at the start of our webinars.
The key problem with that is that too much to eat as well.
Yeah,
So
not enough stomach space.
yeah. Okay.
Staffordshire is famous for oat cakes, which are similar to pancakes. Awesome. Very cool. I love learning from you all. All right. So I think we've got a nice size here. A few folks will keep rolling in, but we'll try to keep them in the loop as best we can. So we're going to start off today. We have about an hour together. Hi, Allison. We have about an hour today, so we're going to be covering the top 7 trends that we've identified are going to be big in the UK for 2022. We're going to start off just to kind of level set. Brian's going to walk us through exactly who we are, what we do, a little bit about our data sourcing to contextualize the insights we'll be sharing today. And then I'll walk us through probably around a 50-minute presentation. If anybody has any questions, as Brian said previously, comments, ideas, please use the chat liberally. We love to have this be as interactive as possible. We're happy to even time allowing kind of research a few things if you have any specific questions on specific topics. And with that, I think we'll get started.
Sure.
All right, so I'll share my screen.
Cool.
Give me just a moment. All right. Brian, can you see okay?
Yeah, I can.
All right, great. Okay, so welcome to, as I said before, the top 7 food and beverage trends for 2022 in the UK. We're going to start off with a little bit of a warm up before we do our introduction. So you can feel free to write this down for yourself privately or share in the chat. We did this also for our US version of this, and it kind of sparked a really interesting conversation. But would love to hear from you all. What concepts do you anticipate being most relevant to your consumers this year? So this can be everything from health and sustainability, which we'll be talking a lot about today, to specific flavors, occasions, you name it. If it's on your mind, share it with us in the chat. And maybe Brian, you can read off a few as they come in.
I'm excited
Great.
to see what people are saying.
Yeah, we'll give people maybe like 30 seconds. Those of you who got the emails from me with my Monty Python / John Cleese references, I did promise perhaps there would be a John Cleese appearance, and here it is, the Ministry of Silly Walks, if anyone is familiar. But I'm hearing some chat. So Brian, what do we got coming in?
Limiting food waste, which is very interested. The limit local produce, plant-based focus, prices and availability of choice, well-being foods. I think sustainability appears to be a growing key area. Definitely, we talked about a lot on our lab. I actually hosted our sustainability Taste Bite Live, and it was very interesting. There's a lot of consciousness about farm to table, sustainability, regenerative farming. There's definitely a concept that is in people's minds, so something that we should keep in mind. What else everybody's thinking that can anticipate for this?
These are awesome topics, and the great news is we're going to be covering pretty much all of those today.
Amazing.
Yeah. So we'll let people keep writing those in if they need to, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Amazing.
So, Brian, you want to kick us off and share a little bit about TasteWise?
Yeah, absolutely. Excited about it. So what is TasteWise? Really what we're here for is what we've been developing is to create the next level of food intelligence. We're building a solution that allows companies anywhere in the food and beverage space to better understand the consumers and to understand how consumers or we as people are cooking, ordering, and eating. Essentially, what we're trying to do and the approach that we're taking is constantly putting the consumer at the center and trying to understand what are people are eating, and really more importantly, why do they choose to do so? If we are able to get closer to consumer behavior, to consumer motivations, and we're able to get behind to the real reasons why consumers are getting closer to a specific dish, concept, ethical ideas, and so on, we are going to be able to develop better products that align closer to what consumers are looking for. So really, what is food intelligence? We can think about it at a high level as we're aggregating every day billions of data endpoints around what people are telling us that they're cooking, they're eating, where are they doing so, when are they doing that, and maybe again why they're doing so. They're posting pictures, they're preparing foods, they're talking about it, they're sharing it in social media. Food intelligence really relies on AI and algorithms to really process humongous amounts of data and turn that into actionable data that allows us to fuel product development processes, marketing, and sales strategies to really help anyone playing in the food and beverage field grow their food business. I think we definitely need to make a lot of emphasis on why we get behind food and what people are putting behind what they eat and so on. So really what we're trying to do is understand the landscape, especially after the last 2 years have been extremely and non-stopping changes. We come in and out of lockdowns. Are we in lockdown? We're kind of halfway there, going in and out again. And that constantly changes consumer behavior. And that behavior sparks different interests, sparks different trends, and pushes brands to really get closer to understand how these rapid changes is going to affect what consumers end up needing or asking for their food and beverage products. So to really what we're trying to do and to try to understand this landscape and the way that it's constantly changing, what we're trying to do is aggregate data from across multiple areas of and really digging deeper into those moments of consumptions where consumers are interacting with food and beverage. So when we go into a restaurant, onto the food service space, or when we bring in products from retail and bringing them home, how are those ingredients making their way into our plates? Or even what are we saying and how are we discussing and commenting about and posting about our experiences with food and beverage? Aggregating all these data sources is what gives us light and helps us get closer to, again, those actionable insights to help fuel our product development process, our marketing strategies, and so on. Is there any questions in the chat there? You can't really see.
I didn't hear any of the pings, so I think we're good. If anybody has any questions about sourcing or specific, to the UK or how these insights can be used for you, please do let us know, either here during the webinar or separately afterwards.
Yeah. So to kind of sum that up, essentially
Great.
what we're really interested in digging in is to really focus on those moments of consumptions. What separates Tastewise from any other tools and platforms and data analytics sources that you might have worked in the past is their ability to have real-time data to understand how consumer behavior constantly changes and affects the way that we as consumers get closer to specific foods and what are we putting into our mouths at the end of it. So what we're really trying to focus is to bring in those actionable insights that are going to help you guys bring products to market 10 times faster, increase your efficacy when it comes down to your marketing and sales, and overall fuel your market shares. So I think this is a good overview and understanding of what Tasteways is. Where do we play? There's obviously a lot to unpack on the technology side of things, on the value proposition and unique place that we have in the market. We'll be happy to take some of those questions. And I think with the insights that Miriam is about to present, the value of our data really shines. And I'm very excited to see what we have prepared for you guys today.
Great. Thank you, Brian. All right, so if we have no questions about that, we'll go ahead and introduce today's topic. So as I just said before, we're going to be talking about the top 7 trends that we anticipate to be significant and influential in the UK this year. I want to quickly run us through how we actually defined and identified these trends, because I think that's important to contextualize why we picked what we did. So each trend that we chose is statistically significant. And without getting too much into kind of the data science behind all of this, because as Brian mentioned, we work with a lot of data points, we work with a lot of algorithms and a lot of proprietary technology. So without getting too far into that, what that essentially means is we paid attention to 3 categories to really define what makes something a trend. So the first is that it had to meet, each trend had to meet a minimum threshold for social, menu, and recipe engagement. So that means that anything that we've included here in this presentation and also in the report, which you all will get a copy of, each trend had to have hit a certain amount of engagement and shown consistent growth over the course of time. So that means we're not looking at teeny tiny trends that maybe 10 people were interested in and 20 people were interested in 6 months later, showing 100% growth, right? Because that is not significant across the board. We're really looking to see that each of these trends hits a threshold of engagement that is significant and enough so that we can kind of identify it as being something interesting, or at least emerging in interest in the mainstream. And as I said before, growth, right? We're looking at year-over-year data for each of these insights, and we're wanting to see consistent growth. That's not to say we're looking just for trend lines that are shooting straight upwards. Trends, as you all know, are more complicated than that. There's seasonality at play. There's all different kinds of things at play, and especially during COVID, we're used to seeing peaks and valleys at this point. But what we want to see is that over the course of a year, on the whole, the trend is moving upward. And finally, sourcing. So all of the trends that we've looked at are sourced from menu, social media, and recipe data sources. And we really want to make sure that trends are showing engagement across all 3 and are showing really that holistic view into the market, right? If we identified something that's just popular in menus but not anywhere else, that would be perhaps a different form of insight, which could be valuable. But it's really important to have all 3 of these supporting each other in order to make the claim that these are trends to watch for 2022.
And that is exactly, and just to highlight that part,
Sure.
is because it is really one of our true unique value propositions against some of the other tools out there where they might have silo visibility into what happens or into each of these specific industries. We're one of the only tools out there aggregating this data across some of these places and moments of consumptions and places that we interact with food. So when we go again to restaurants, we speak about it on social media, or we bring it out on our recipes, aggregating this information is what really helps us get and have that full visibility to what's happening in the market and with our consumers.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Well said. So let's take a look at some of the macro trends that we have identified using what Brian has just said and are at play in the UK. So all of the 7 that we're looking at today are going to be influenced by these macro trends. And if you were with us for the US edition, you'll notice that there's a bit of an overlap here. We are seeing some global trends that are influencing markets across the globe. And specifically, there's some tie-ins between the UK and the US. We're not going to focus too much on that today, but that is an interesting topic in and of itself. So in the UK, macro trends, we're looking at sustainability, which I heard a lot of you mention before. Health, again, heard a lot of you mention, and the experience that comes with eating and drinking. A fourth that I want to add here as well is consumer behavior itself, right? We know that us as individuals who are consumers, or who are people who are eating and drinking out in the world, I tend to not love the word consumer. We are seeing in ourselves, in our own behavior, and also in the behavior of our audiences, that people are becoming more sophisticated, demanding, and tech enabled. So as the world progresses through COVID, right, but also just generally in this kind of very digital era, we're seeing that consumers are using technology to really make more specific decisions for their needs. And that we can see that across sustainability, health, and experiential moments. So just to quickly run through these, sustainability is up 12% year over year. We're going to talk about that in a moment in the UK. We're seeing a lot of affinity here for, obviously for climate, which is a huge part of sustainability, as well as plant-based and vegan. We're also seeing in health the rise of specific health motivations and the downfall of just the vague term healthy. So we're seeing that food and beverage that's considered healthy, or is picked for just for being healthy, is actually down 34% year over year. But specific health motivations and kind of foundationally functional health motivations, which we'll talk about in a moment, are actually increasing significantly. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. And finally, experiential. So we're looking at unique, authentic, adventurous, attractive. All of these things are going to come to play in the trends we're looking at, and are all experiencing year over year growth. So let's start and take a look. I'm not sure why this one is missing. It shouldn't be. Maybe it's an issue with my Wi-Fi, but we have 7 trends for 2022. We're going to be looking at sustainable drill downs. We're going to be looking at non-alcoholic buzz and bubbles, so looking at non-alcoholic drinks. We're going to be looking at florals and sensory intrigue. We're going to be looking at foraging for local flavor, regional cuisines in Asia, adaptogens and functional health, and gourmet tackle sustainability, which is a way of saying that the way that sustainability is showing up in gourmet food and beverage. So with that, let's jump into our very first one. All right, so sustainable drill downs. Sustainability sounds like it's top of mind for a lot of you here on this call, and I think it's top of mind for all of us, both as individuals and as people who are involved in the food and beverage industry. And as I mentioned before, sustainable food and beverage is actually up 12% year over year in the UK. So that means consumer interactions with and engagement with food and beverage that is considered to be sustainable is up 12% over the past year. And particularly, we're seeing that consumers are refocusing their attention on sustainable practices. And I'm going to get to what that means in a moment. But first, I want to draw your attention to this graph that we're looking at here. So in this scatter plot, we're looking at the share versus the growth of sustainability concepts. And all of that is basically to say, we're looking at, if you look at the x-axis here, this is the penetration of these concepts in consumer conversations. So what are people talking about, and how frequently are they talking about it? Versus the y-axis, which is the growth. So how fast are these concepts growing in terms of quantity and engagement in the market? So we're seeing that animal rights, for example, is one of the most penetrated or most established concepts within sustainability. And you can make the argument that animal rights obviously is also related to a lot of other things. It's a big deal within veganism and plant-based, but it's actually declining year over year. So this is something that's not top of mind right now for UK consumers. And we're seeing some middle of the road engagement here with packaging and consumption motivation. So we're seeing that recycling, for example, is pretty well penetrated, but isn't growing very quickly. Same with food waste, packaging, and biodegradable. So those are all kind of middle of the road, right? They're not growing very quickly, but they are somewhat well penetrated, more so for recycling and food waste. We can see some manufacturing ones like pollution and clean sources are actually pretty low penetrated and not growing very quickly. But the ones that are growing the fastest are actually the ones that have to do with sourcing. So we're seeing that regenerative farming, habitat conservation, and carbon footprint are actually the concepts within sustainability that are growing the fastest within kind of the UK scene. So just to give you some of the numbers, carbon footprint is up 17% year over year in discussions of food and beverage in the UK. Habitat conservation is up 32%, and regenerative farming is up 46%. And I think what's really interesting about this is that we're seeing that consumers are moving away from the focus around the end of the product journey. So for example, recycling, right? Food waste, packaging, what to do with something once you've finished it, right? What do we do with that to-go cup once we've finished drinking our morning coffee? Or what do we do with the plastic packaging, or hopefully the plant-based packaging, right? consumers are actually moving away from the focus on end of life for food and beverage products, and are actually refocusing that interest around where their products are actually being sourced from. And we're seeing that this is actually really aligned with a conversation kind of more largely as a society. We're seeing this in the US, but also, of course, in the UK as well, and in other places, about the shift to the onus being on manufacturers and companies rather than just exclusively on the consumer, right? If you had looked in the 70s, or even more recently, but this is kind of where it started, the onus on the consumer to recycle, right? And to be really aware of how they're kind of concluding the life cycle of the packaging or the products that they've consumed. And we're seeing that consumers are actually thinking more deeply, and are using the kind of wealth of information available to them to understand a little bit more about these more sourcing-based concepts within sustainability. Do we have any questions about that? I'm hoping that that's clear. Brian, do we have anything in the chat?
We do have a question. It talks a little bit about understanding the scale of the numbers that we're talking about, and
Sure.
It comes from Chris. So, I mean, if you want to go ahead and take it,
Yeah, sure. So the social share here, let's look at animal rights, right? This is looking to be around, let's say, 0.37%. That sounds like a very small number, right? But it's out of the entirety of all of the food and beverage conversations in the UK. So only 0.37% of those conversations actually have to do with animal rights. But if we looked at that within the sustainable conversations, that would be a higher metric. Does that make sense? Whereas the growth year over year is, let's look at habitat conservation, which I think we said was 32% year over year. That means that the volume of that conversation is growing at a rate 32% higher than last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, another question here talks about which I think is a very interesting question, is what
Sure.
will be the potential reasons why people are caring less about animal rights? And I think maybe the answer, I mean, it might be very broad. It has to be, and maybe Miriam can have the conversation around this is the shift of mindset of consumers, and we're a little bit more, in my perspective, I think we're a little bit more educated. We understand the ramifications and impact of how the beginning of part of our foods, where does it come from, how are we growing them, how are we bringing them to the shelves, and so on, how that impacts overall chain. So it may not necessarily that we care less, but we are much more educated about how the entire kind of supply chain works, and that's why our mindsets are shifting more towards the beginning part of the process and making sure that we're growing and building sustainable supply chains that allows us to have more of a long-term opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think part of this also is just in the industry, we're seeing so much innovation around, if we think about plant-based specifically, and there's so much news and so much information right now around plant-based and its impact on personal health, that I think that that's taking the lion's share of the conversation. If we look at vegan as a kind of a general topic, we're actually seeing that personal health is far outweighing the interest in animal rights right now, right? Those things are tied hand in hand, of course, but I think the current moment in time, people are much more interested in production and the impact of that production on personal health than they are necessarily on the animals that those plant-based methods are replacing, if that makes sense. Happy to have this conversation more. I think it's really interesting, but
sure.
Yeah, cool. All right, ready to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we'll take a look actually at some trending sustainability methods. We talked about deforestation or habitat conservation. We talked about regenerative farming and carbon footprint. I just wanted to call out some interesting examples here. So we have one from London here on the left. So just to kind of inspire you all, right? Because it's all well and good to talk about these trends, but when we can actually see examples of them and how people are eating and drinking these things on the plate and engaging with them, whether that's in a restaurant like we see, I believe, on the left or on the right, versus cooking something at home, I think it's really good to have these examples here on the plate. So feel free to take a look. The one on the left here is a lentil and mushroom Wellington. So taking kind of this classic British dish and making it with lentils. So replacing that meat content and specifically focusing on lentil, right? That new protein replicant or protein source, the sustainability of that item and thinking about the carbon and water footprint. Over here, we've got palm oil, right? So I hope we all are aware about the impact that palm oil has on not only the industry, but on the world. It involves a lot of deforestation, a lot of use of fire, a lot of really kind of damaging environmental practices. So looking at how to create porridge with really decadent toppings that steers clear of palm oil for the sake of kind of habitat conservation. And finally, looking at bringing in some reading here about regenerative farming and how they've been inspired by this particular, I believe, chef and their work on regenerative farming. So if anybody has any questions or anything that they've seen in their lives that they feel translates well here, would love to hear about it in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to take a look at what this actually looks like in restaurants. So I really like this slide, and I'm excited to share it with you all. We took a look actually using our food service sales solution at where in the UK are the highest mentions of sustainability on restaurant menus. So looking at this as a percentage of the total number of restaurants. So just to kind of clarify this for you, we're looking at, let's say, Brighton and Bristol, which are the leaders here actually for menu mentions of sustainability. So it looks about, let's say, 2.7%. So 2.7% of menus or of restaurants, excuse me, in Brighton and Bristol mention sustainability on their menu somewhere. That is a pretty low number, which indicates that there's a lot of room for growth in this category, right? Whether you're a restaurateur looking to bring in, sustainable ingredients and you call it out, right? Consumers are actually really looking for this and they're excited about it. And when I say sustainability here, this is covering not just the word sustainable, right? Or sustainability, it's actually using, our AI uses something called natural language processing, which allows it to capture everything from carbon footprint to regenerative farming, everything we spoke about before. So I think this is really interesting that we're seeing Brighton and Bristol showing kind of the biggest affinity for sustainability on their menus. Birmingham looks like a close second, along with just kind of the UK generally. As we go through these graphs, you'll see the UK is always here on the left, so you can get a sense of what's happening broadly and then kind of broken down by geography here. So London and Birmingham seem to be close seconds. Followed by Leeds and Manchester, and then following up the rear is Edinburgh and Glasgow. So the Scottish presence is not so strong here. But again, lots of room for improvement here and lots of room for engagement on menus. Hearing a lot of beeps, so maybe there's a lot of questions. Brian, do you want to pick and choose maybe a few to share?
We've been answering as we go, also been answering in the chat.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I think for now we're good.
Awesome, great, okay. So we're going to wrap up here for sustainability. Obviously, there's so much more to say, but this is definitely a big one. The big takeaway here is that sustainability is becoming a much more drilled down, if we forgive the environmental consequences of drilling, let's say. But if we think about the niche categories within sustainability, consumers are becoming much more aware of those and are turning towards ones that have to do with sourcing around ingredients more so than they are end of life for products. All right, number 2, we're going to look at regional cuisines, regional Asian cuisines specifically, and how those play in the UK. So Asian cuisines are actually the most popular cuisine in the UK. So about 30% of cuisine discussion have to do with Asian cuisines. And we're using Asian cuisines here broadly to mean anything that's within the Asian continent. So that's 30% of cuisine discussion. So 30% of the time that someone calls out the actual cuisine of what they are eating and drinking, it has to do with Asian cuisine. We're seeing that regional varieties are actually growing the fastest within that. So the top, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment, the top established favorites within Asian cuisine in the UK are Japanese, Chinese, and Thai. So those are taking the top spots. But recent growth in regional, more kind of specific Asian cuisines that go beyond those top 3 kind of heavy hitters offer a novel spin into a category that folks are already fairly familiar with. And the reason that we're that kind of underpins this that we're seeing is what we like to call it Tastewise kitchen travel. So as Brian mentioned before, right, who knows when we're in a shutdown, when we're out. I actually just read, I think yesterday, that the UK travel restrictions are changing, and I think they've been removed. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but so, any given moment, there's all different kinds of things going on with travel and shutdowns, and who knows, right? Lots of unpredictable shifts. So people are using the kitchen to actually explore different cultures, right? And they're diving deep into regional cuisine. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go out and get some Chinese food, right? Which people are still doing, of course, they might dive deeper into regional Chinese cuisine. So what area of China, what regional cuisine are they actually going to go out and enjoy? And this is true kind of across these other regional varieties as well. We're seeing this both in home cooking and in restaurants. So we'll give you some of the numbers here. These are the growth rates for these trending regional Asian cuisines. So Korean is growing in interest 48% year over year. Taiwanese is growing 47% roughly. Malaysian almost 45%. Sichuan 41%. Singaporean let's say 40%, 39%, and Filipino 37%. Some honorable mentions here that didn't make this particular slide, but Hong Kong cuisine is up 59% year over year, and Hainanese is actually up 57%, but that's a pretty small one. So these are the ones to watch here on the screen. So Korean, Taiwanese, Malaysian, Sichuan, Singaporean, and Filipino. I want to call out that, of course, Indian cuisine is also huge here, and we can also look at the rise of specific regional cuisines within India as well. But we're actually seeing that these Asian cuisines are rising faster and are more worth paying attention to in this particular moment. 7% of the UK restaurants are Indian cuisines, whereas 5.6 are Asian. So there's almost a parity there. It's a little bit, let's say 7 to 6%. There's a little bit of a gap there, but not huge. So if we take a look at some examples, we're seeing trending in Asian cuisines across, as I said before, home cooking and ordering or eating in person when that allows. So just wanted to show you here some of the trending or most popular recipes and social media posts. So from Lazy Cat Kitchen, we have something that has 45,000 saves, which is looking at bibimbap. So it's looking at how they describe it as a Korean precursor to the trendy Buddha bowl, right? But it's actually a very traditional dish, and looking at ways to make this plant-based and vegan. We're also seeing Taiwanese beef noodles, and over here we're seeing a Malaysian soup, or curry, excuse me. So a few ideas here to kind of spark your appetite, and kind of bringing home the point that home cooking and restaurants are all showing this interest in regional cuisines.
Taiwanese beef noodles making me hungry.
Yeah, right. Agreed. That bok choy looks great. So if we break this down into geographic areas, we can actually see that Brighton has the highest share of restaurants serving Korean dishes at the moment. So it's almost 8% of restaurants in Brighton serve some form of Korean dish. Birmingham rules for Malaysian dishes, so that's a little bit less than 6%. And Taiwanese dishes actually are pretty well underrepresented across the UK generally. You can see how low the UK here is. London, surprisingly, usually we see London pretty high for these regional cuisines, but not here. And we see that Brighton and Bristol have absolutely no presence for Taiwanese dishes to speak of. So Edinburgh, surprisingly, is the one to watch here, and that would be worth digging more into. But the biggest takeaway here is that there's lots of room for growth. And instead of, let's say, kind of an actionable example here would be when creating a new product or when creating a new menu item, right? Calling out the specific region that this cuisine came from, right? So instead of saying, I don't know what a good example here would be. Can't think of one right at the moment, but instead of saying, Chinese food, you could say Sichuan, or instead of saying, Asian, whatever, right? Calling it out in a recipe, let's say that it specifically comes from Malaysia. So ideas here for getting a little bit drilling down into the specifics. I'm hoping that you're seeing the echo here with sustainability as well, that consumers are taking this broad concept and drilling in deeper, and the same is here as well. So Asian cuisine, right, popular, and people are using that familiar context and landscape to drill deeper down into regional cuisines. All right, let's go to the next one. We're going to take a look at non-alcoholic buzz and bubbles. We're thinking about non-alcoholic forms of beverages, and specifically, we're going to be looking at sparkling wines. So we've identified that sparkling wines are actually next in line for the alcohol-free trend. So non-alcoholic sparkling wines are actually growing 10% year over year, and that might sound small, but it's actually gaining speed as we go. You can take a look here at the graph on the left, the bar chart, and we're seeing that the top 4 most popular beverages that are given an alcohol-free spin in the UK are cocktails, beer, gin, and sparkling wine. Interesting, cocktails that are alcohol-free are up 9% year over year. Beer is actually down 6% year over year. Gin is up 3% year over year, whereas sparkling wine is up 10% year over year. So it's the fastest growing category, even though it is the least penetrated category. So this is an exciting white space. There's not a lot of players in the market yet, but it is growing fastest in consumer popularity. So cocktails, for example, are the most penetrated, and that's what we're seeing here with this bar chart. So around 30% of conversations around alcohol-free beverages actually focus on cocktails. Around 20% focus on beer. Let's say around 5% is gin, and then below that, let's say around 3% is actually sparkling wine. Today's top alcohol-free sparkling wines that we're seeing a lot of growth. So Prosecco accounts for already 51% of today's non-alcoholic sparkling wine consumption, and Champagne is 27%. And I think something that one of the things that is driving this trend for alcohol-free sparkling wines is the return of celebrations. And that might sound a little bit cheesy, but I think it's actually really important that people are returning to let's say weddings or birthday parties in person, or given the moment, right? Of course that there are peaks and valleys to how we can engage with one another communally during COVID, but we're seeing a high correlation between sparkling wines and celebration that only continues to grow, and we're seeing that Prosecco and Champagne within that landscape are making kind of a return and making their mark. I want to point out a fun fact about cocktails. So cocktails, interesting cocktails for fun occasions, is actually growing 17% year over year. So when it comes to, Friday night, going out, Saturday night, whatever it is, right? And wanting an alcohol-free beverage that still has that fun atmosphere and vibe, people are turning to cocktails. But when it comes to celebrating some sort of special occasion, which of course is fun as well, but kind of that unique vibe, we're looking at sparkling wines. So I think the big takeaway here is that people are not willing to kind of check their nutritional or mental health needs, let's say, at the door when they're coming into celebrations. And so they're looking for alternatives that are feel special and elevated, but are also alcohol free in order to support their health goals. All right, let's head to the next one. You can see some examples here. For the sake of time, I think I'm going to kind of skip over these slides, but you'll get these to your inbox later today. So feel free to take a look, and all of these links are clickable, so you'll be able to kind of explore these recipes and these posts for yourself and hopefully get some inspiration. Finally, before we move on to our next trend, I just want to kind of call your attention to this geographic breakdown again. So restaurants that feature, and this is restaurants and bars altogether, that feature non-alcoholic beverages. Birmingham is actually the top player in that space. We're looking at around 7% of restaurants already feature non-alcoholic beverages. It looks like London, Edinburgh, and Brighton are right behind them, with Glasgow, Manchester, and Bristol kind of bringing up the rear, as well as Leeds. So there's a lot of opportunity here in each of these cities to create non-alcoholic creations, but on restaurant menus, but as well as products, right? We're seeing this also in home kitchens and just in consumer behavior generally. People are looking for these non-alcoholic alternatives. All right, I'll pause there. Brian, any questions I should be aware of?
We just had one from Fiona. I'm reading it as we speak. Is there any also bias towards females, and about specifically the non-alcoholic? I think in this case, the research, it was not biased at all. What we're tracking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Miriam, we were looking at is the entire food and beverage space. We could potentially then filter. We also have functionality that allows us to dig deeper into our audience that we're looking. So that would be either filtering by specific audiences, like gender, or like
Generation,
age, generation, X, C, and Y, and so on, or a specific type of audience like foodies, chefs, and more. So we could potentially see the data that we've been going through, so through the lenses of specific audiences, to better understand then these trends and how do they apply in the eyes of female males, Gen X, and so on.
Sure. Yeah. And if that's a specific number you'd like to have, shoot us a note at live@tastars.io, and I'll happily pull that for you after today's webinar. I do want to call out that Brighton has a high penetration of, it has a kind of a young clientele. I'm sure you all know this better than I do, but is known for kind of having a hipster scene. We're seeing that there are a lot of foodies there. So the correlation between foodies and non-alcoholic beverages, I imagine, is fairly high. I would need to do the research on that, but that's another example of audience that we could look into. All right, let's head to our next trend. So we're looking at foraged ingredients. So foraging for local flavor, the connection between foraged ingredients and local identity. So this is one of my favorite ones. We're looking at foraged herbs and flowers specifically, and how those add local flavor to craft beverages. So interest in foraged ingredients generally is actually up 17% year over year. And for those who aren't familiar with the term foraged, right, these are ingredients that are not mass produced. These are really small batched actually cultivated or not even cultivated, right? Just harvested or foraged from local areas. So this is something that's sort of the counterpoint to the mass-produced ingredients that we often see in today's world. So people are interested in finding these ingredients in the wild. They're doing it on their own for their own home kitchens, but they're also consuming products and dishes out at restaurants. So either, you know, getting from their local store or at their local restaurant, really drawing towards these beverages that feature these kind of craft foraged herbs and flowers. So you can see here, I love this trend line. This is a really excellent example. We're seeing a 17% year-over-year growth in wild food, which is another way of kind of describing foraged ingredients in alcoholic beverages over time. So a really, really nice trend line there, 17% up. We're seeing that the top motivations for alcoholic drinks, so again, it's craft beverage scene, for alcohol with foraged ingredients is gourmet. So we're seeing a lot of affinity between gourmet and these foraged ingredients. Local, which is what we're going to focus on in just a moment. Botanical, fresh, and homemade. So a lot of really appealing motivations here that consumers are looking at. It looks like around 32% of craft beverages that involve foraged ingredients are considered to be gourmet. Around 28% people are really calling out the local flavors, right? That's one of the amazing benefits of foraged ingredients is that it can have this really clear and close tie-in to the local area that those foraged ingredients came from. So some of the top ones that we're seeing is elderflower, which is something common across the UK. It's growing 5% year over year in consumer interest. Algae and seaweed that comes from Britain's coastlines is actually growing 55% year over year. And berries, especially blackberries, are commonly foraged, and those are growing 21% year over year. And we're also seeing some mint and rosehip coming up. So let's take a look at some examples. You can see them here. We've got some great stuff across the board. We've got from St. Andrews, from West Sussex, from Exeter. So lots of really interesting things going on here. Lots of craft brands that are involving, for example, this beer has foraged elderflower. This is a mermaid gin that includes botanicals, right? Gin is a really great context for this. I've actually had the St. Andrews Eden Mill, fantastic forager gin, which includes local flavors from endangered hedgerows, actually. And they're really focused on the climate impact of foraging, which I think is really interesting. I believe that St. Andrews is this particular distillery for gin is looking to become Scotland's leading climate positive distillery. So that's a really interesting kind of connection there between one of our earlier trends, right, about sourcing and this trend as well. And then finally, we see here foraged pineapple weed in this Fuddle Organic beer. So a great mix here of craft beverages, foraged ingredients, definitely top of mind and a really interesting trend to watch. All right. Let's head to our next one. So let's look at adaptogens and functional health. Adaptogens, for those of you that don't know, are actually nutrients that allow the body to adapt or to react to stress in a more fortified and healthy way. So there's a lot of correlation here with stress relief, right? Brain function, all that kind of sort of good stuff. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So again, we're looking in the beverage space, but not exclusively. There are lots of applications for adaptogens in the food world as well. We're just seeing that there is a lot of interest in classic beverages that get an adaptogenic boost, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So adaptogens are specifically emerging in home cooking uses with an 8% increase in recipes year over year, as well as restaurants with a 17% increase in menu inclusions over the past year. So on the left, you can see the increase in adaptogens in recipes. And on the right, you can see the increase in inclusions on menus. So we're seeing kind of the early starts of this trend. This is one of the smaller trends. Again, it has cleared that threshold to be statistically significant, but it is kind of on the smaller end. So definitely worth watching, and it's kind of right at its start. We're seeing, just for kind of a counterpoint, in the US, this trend is a lot larger. And we have seen with other trends around functional health that the UK tends to follow some of these things kind of later than the US, followed, even up to a year afterwards. So given the trend lines in the US, I imagine that this will be continue to grow even beyond 2022. We're seeing that leading adaptogens are actually prized for their medicinal properties. So consumers are calling out the medicinal functions of adaptogens 50% more this year than last, as well as stress relief, which is up 25% year over year. And brain function kind of brings up the rear with a 22% year over year interest. We're seeing that hot beverages specifically are the most relevant here. and a full third of reishi and cordyceps, which are types of fungi, and you can see here at this bottom point, which are kind of the most valued adaptogen right now, actually feature tea or coffee. So in a third of the times that people are using fungi as adaptogens, they're using that in a tea or coffee context. So kind of the classic British cup of tea is getting this really earthy twist, bringing in functional health to the conversation, and kind of elevating these beverages. You can see here, for example, an ashwagandha latte recipe for at-home use already has 7,000 likes, or 7,000 engagements. So kind of some interesting things there. And I pulled some interesting examples across coffee and tea, but also an alcoholic example here as well, just for you all to get a sense. So here we've got a reishi, maca root, and cinnamon. It looks like coffee smoothie, right? Which is really interesting. So kind of combining those two. We've got an evening kind of soothing, clean eating, adaptogenic latte, or actually, sorry, moon milk for before bed. So again, really bringing in that stress relief. We've got this craft beer, which brings in reishi and specifically calls out the functional benefits of consuming reishi. And here we've got a chicory latte that features lion's mane. So I think a really interesting way to look at both food service and home cooking, seeing how stress relief is coming to play, seeing how brain function is coming to play. I think it's also really interesting to note that stress relief, we saw a huge peak for that at the start of the pandemic, right? People, their stress levels were kind of in crisis mode. People were looking for ways to calm down. And while that still can be true, we've actually seen a decrease over time in just stress relief in and of itself. But when we think about stress relief in conjunction with other functional health motivations like brain function or depression treatment, right? These kind of medicinal moments, we're actually seeing an increase. So people are coming to understand that stress relief is not only about mood, right? But it also is a important part of how our systems function, right? From a physiological level. So they're understanding that stress relief is actually a form of functional health. And they're pursuing ingredients that can support the different kind of layers of functional health in that process. If that
We
makes
have a
sense.
question, which is interesting, your take on it, Miriam. We might have our data science team to speak about this, but the question is about, does CBD falls into the adaptogenics category? Or
Great question. I do not believe so. I think
falls
we
under
treat.
supplements, right?
Sorry?
It falls under supplements?
I believe it falls under supplements. I believe that we've categorized those as differently just because consumers interact with them differently. Because CBD and adaptogens, I think also I don't want to speak to anything scientifically that I can't speak to without obviously a lot of knowledge. But I believe that they are classified differently in terms of just like their chemical makeup. But we also, from the tech side of things, classify them different as well. Great. All right.
Yeah, I think an interesting kind of business view of the presence of all this is not only the utilization and the way that this is making its way, but the real shift in minds of consumers that have gone from realizing and understanding and turning to food and beverage specifically to help with our health and growth. And that is becoming a lot more of a presence rather than turning into medicine, turning into pills, we're turning into natural sourced opportunities that help us increase our health. And that is definitely, we're seeing it in the US, we're seeing it also in the UK, and we're seeing that trend definitely be more than just a trend and a fact for our consumers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that goes back to exactly this, right? The medicinal food as medicine, right? Food as an important part of treating whatever ails you, right? And that's up 50% year over year for adaptogenic use. So I think that's a really great proof case for what Brian is saying, which is absolutely not just a fad. We're seeing that everywhere. All right, so let's head into the world of taste. So we're going to be looking at florals and how that relates to sensory intrigue, which is a really fancy term we came up with, but I'm going to explain what that means in just a moment. So if we look at florals, we're seeing that floral flavor profiles. So for those of you who work in flavor houses or are thinking about flavors for whatever food and beverage product you have, this could be interesting for you. They're growing 41% year over year in consumer interest. So consumers people are talking about loving floral flavor profiles, 41% more than they were last year. We're seeing that this is tied to unique sensory experiences. So why floral, right? In and of itself, it doesn't sound particularly interesting, but we're seeing that as the kind of monotony of the pandemic draws on, people are looking to engage with things that are a little bit more exciting, a little bit more kind of tapping into the senses, providing this really sensory experience, something that feels special and unique. We saw this at the start of the pandemic, right? When people were making everything from, I don't know if you remember the floral sourdough, right? That everyone was getting into, or sourdough in and of itself is a great example, right? People were getting new skills, kind of testing that out in terms of the sensory experience, all the way through to, I mean, name any trend from 2020, right? And had something to do with unique, special, interesting, right? So this is kind of the new take as we have become old hands at kind of pandemic fatigue, right? And this is the new version for 2022. So florals are definitely the way that people are, one of the ways that people are looking to add sensory intrigue back into their eating and drinking. And this aligns with the top trending motivations that we're seeing in general food and beverage. So if you look at the scatter plot here on the right, and we'll talk about this in a moment for the left, we're seeing that unique is one of the top growing motivations generally for food and beverage. That's growing 20% year over year. We're seeing attractive is growing 7% year over year, and that's actually very well penetrated already in the market. So that kind of visual aesthetic experience of your food and beverage. And we're seeing a few other things here as well. So gourmet, well penetrated, but not growing so fast, whereas things like authentic or refreshing, right? Those are growing quickly. If we look over here at the top experience motivations for florals, right? So over here, we were looking at specifically, generally food and beverage. Over here on the left, we're looking at just for florals. So motivations for that have to do with experience for florals, the ones that are kind of that take the lion's share are attractive and gourmet and unique. And those are the three that we looked over here and spoke about with their growth rate. So we're seeing a really great affinity and alignment there, which I think is really interesting, that people are eating florals, whether that's dried flowers all the way through to floral taste, right? So essences, things like that, have to do with attractiveness, gourmet, and unique. Over time. We can see that the top edible flowers, which I think are also always like a fun visual thing to include here, are cherry blossoms, elderflower, and orange blossoms. So cherry blossoms are growing 32% year over year. We have a great example here of a kind of a garnish on a cake. Elderflower, we mentioned before, right? But in this context, it's growing 10% year over year, and orange blossom is up 14% year over year, specifically in baking. We can have a few kind of really great examples of them here. Everything from baked goods to cheeses. We've got some really awesome things here. I believe this one also has it's the blue. I'm forgetting the name. The blue flower that's common in the UK. This little guy here. I noticed that and wanted to try it. But we've also got cherry blossom, right? We've got this beautiful tart. We've got macarons. So all different kinds of interesting applications here. You'll see from the aesthetic side of things to also like the flavor profile side of things. So definitely worth paying attention to. All right, last but not least, we've got our final trend for today. We're going to be looking at gourmet food and beverage and its relationship to sustainability. All right, so you know what? We have a few minutes, and I think we have enough time for this. I want to hear from all of you in the chat. When I say gourmet, what do you think is the top motivating factor behind gourmet? When a consumer thinks about, or somebody thinks about, it can even be you, thinks about gourmet, what do they most associate with gourmet? Is it the quality of the ingredients? Is it the price? Is it the atmosphere? Is it the exclusiveness of the experience, right? I want to hear kind of from you all, what do people think gourmet actually means?
We're getting answers like the occasion, great taste, that it's a treat, that it's a reward, maybe the quality, that it feels elevated, that is a special occasion, the recipe feels superior. This is an interesting one, intensity and quality.
Intensity meaning intensity of taste or intensity of preparation?
Probably both, but I'll let Nicole answer that. Quality of ingredients. Nicole is answering that is the intensity of the taste.
Okay, cool.
That has some relationship with prestige. I feel personally, I think it's to me feel it's about getting fully indulged and like satisfying all the cravings that one single bite can give you. But that aligns with some of the people that are saying with high prestige, high quality, maybe very flavorful. Very interesting definition here from Elise. She's talking about that is a self-care moment, something that time that you take for yourself and like dive yourself into that food. Multisensorial. Very interesting answers, really.
Wow. Yeah, these are really interesting. And actually it's interesting how it taps into a lot of what we've covered today, right? That sensory experience, taste, it sounds like the experience of it, right? So that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And the trend that we're looking at now is how sustainability is actually joining the ranks as well. So all of those things that you just said, which we're seeing all of that reflected both personally and in the data, which is, I think, a very cool thing. We're seeing also that sustainability is becoming one of the metrics that people are using to understand if something is gourmet or not. Not in and of itself, right? But in combination with everything that you're talking about in the chat. So interest in sustainable food and beverage in gourmet contexts and gourmet applications is actually up 28% year over year. So you can see this really clear trend line over the course of the last year. We're seeing that this is interest in sustainability in gourmet contexts. So this is consumer conversation. So again, really, really clear, 28% year over year. People are calling out, they're noticing, they're enjoying when they are aware of sustainability within gourmet, or they're pursuing it, right? They're actively creating for themselves gourmet experiences that involve sustainability. And we can see that the top ingredients for sustainable gourmet, so the moments where we're seeing sustainability come to play specifically for gourmet, is within beer, chocolate, coffee, fish, and gin. So this means when a consumer is, or again, I hate the word consumer, but when a person is having a gourmet meal and they're specifically calling it out as such, and again, using natural language processing, that could be in everything from luxurious to posh to, treat of a meal, whatever it is, right? They're calling out these specific categories, the sustainability behind them. And if you'll notice, right, all of these, with the exception of maybe gin, but the top four for sure, have historically had damaging production effects, right, on planet and on people. So beer has long been criticized for its impact on water sources. It's the largest ingredient and the largest waste byproduct for the manufacturing. Chocolate, we know, we've seen a lot of this in the news, is around unethical production methods and also around water use. We're seeing that coffee, again, similar to chocolate, and fishes and seafood, which has a lot of sustainability implications. So when these categories have a sustainable backing to them, consumers are really excited about it. They're calling it out. It makes their experience of gourmet that more elevated and that more enriched, which I think is cool to see. We're seeing that, I just want to call this out as well, chocolate and coffee are about 7%, comprise about 7% of the social share for the sustainable conversation in gourmet, specifically due to their links with fair trade. So fair trade is one of those motivations that has to do with sustainability and is showing up a lot on gourmet plates. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that, these ingredients that are typically associated with gourmet, like protein, alcohol, desserts, whatever, like we just saw here in the bar chart, those are all independently of gourmet undergoing a kind of sustainable revolution that consumers are responding well to. And when they're in a gourmet context, it adds that elevation, it adds that extra something special for the experience. So the kind of, I think, practical takeaway here is if you're creating, a gourmet product to be used in a gourmet way, or I liked the call out that someone said about a recipe, right? If you're presenting a recipe that is specifically for a gourmet meal, but probably most likely if you are a gourmet restaurant or a high-end restaurant, thinking about how to include sustainability into your menus or previous examples, right, recipes or new product development, I think will show a huge amount of consumer gratitude and trust, right? Inspiring trust in the practices that you're bringing to the table.
Things that we maybe didn't show today, and definitely is up for continuous research, and we need to dig deeper into the data, but maybe the correlations, and just to give you guys a visibility into other things that we could do, is then start understanding how is the relationship between prices and the mention, or the relationship between sustainable and gourmet. If we as consumers or people are expecting our meals to be gourmet, but that means that we're willing to pay a little bit more because we definitely are okay with the fact that they're sustainable, that it's regenerative farming, that is locally sourced, and so on. So we can then start unpacking that and how that relates to the composure of our dishes, composure of our menus, and building our pricing strategies and understanding where consumers feel and what their relationship is with that as well.
That's a really, really good point. Yeah. And I think the point about pricing, that sustainable ingredients in today's landscape tend to be on the higher end, right, of pricing. So there is that link also between gourmet being higher priced and sustainable ingredients being higher priced. So just in and of itself, right, there is that connection there, that people are willing to pay a little bit more for gourmet and they're willing to pay a little bit more for sustainable. So there's like a kind of obvious marriage there in some ways between those two. But definitely we could look at pricing for sure, and maybe we'll do a piece of content for that for you all, maybe a webinar or a report or something like that. But we'll definitely note that for ourselves. So I'll leave you with on this trend with the examples, and you can take a deeper dive into this on your own. But I wanted to call out here, so London Gastro Boy, a gastro pub in London. It looks like it's called, is the name of the account, but the name of the restaurant, I think, is the Lock and the Tyne. And it's by Adam Handling, who I believe is a chef. And I really like this example because it combines local British produce, right, with a huge emphasis on sustainable practices, with local vegetable gardens and orchards. So maybe some elements of foraging there as well. So we've got gourmet, foraged, sustainability, right? A lot of the things that we've talked about today, all in one example. And I think that British cuisine has such a, you know, a long history to it, and is shaping and reshaping over the course of years. It's definitely a fascinating topic, and I love to see when these trends come to the plate on something that is traditional and you know, local to the country that we're looking at. So I'll leave you all with these insights. Thank you for your time today. If anyone has any questions, we're at about time. We're at 12 o'clock Eastern. So we've been here together for about an hour. If anybody has any questions about these specific insights, please shoot us a note at live@tastedrice.io. Those come directly to me. So I will be happy to pull, you know, if there's any data that you were interested in exploring more, would love to kind of help get that to you so you can use this in your own work. So I hope this was interesting for you all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And would love to hear maybe in the chat, what was your favorite trend that you heard, or most exciting trend? Which of these 7 are you most excited about in your own work, or even personally, right? We all eat and drink, so what are you most excited about? Adaptogens, cool. Awesome, Marcelo, great. Be in touch if I can be helpful in that learning process. Foraging, yeah, Liz, I'm excited about that one too. I actually was inspired by creating this webinar and just ordered a adaptogenic mushroom growing kit for my counter, which I guess doesn't count as foraging because it is inside. But
what type of shrooms?
It's I believe a king oyster mushroom set. It's by North Spore, if anyone is interested.
Wow.
Gourmet TV, sustainable, non-alcoholic prosecco and champagne. Awesome, great guys, thank you for sharing. So wishing you the best of luck. Have a great 2022. If we can be of help at all, let us know. Shoot us a note at live@tastedrice.io. Big thanks to Brian for joining us today. Yeah, of course. For those of you who are regulars, you know that Ron usually joins me on these. Ron actually has COVID right now, so think of him in your thoughts and wish him and his family a big healing. But it was a real treat to have you, Brian. I really enjoyed doing this with you.
Appreciate it. Really very interesting to see everybody's excitement and interest, and we are waiting for you guys to come with to us with more questions, more intent to go through our data. We are very excited to share more.
Amen. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Have a great rest of the week, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Bye, guys.
Bye.